right. Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Pete Schwartz from Cal Poly, who will be speaking on environmental justice. Please keep cameras and microphones off during the talk and submit any questions in the Zoom chat throughout the session. We will answer questions at the end.
All right, great. I get started.
Yes.
And okay, everyone can hear me all right? All right, I'll go forward with the presumption that you do. So, we see these talks about what are we going to do with sustainability, and a lot of it addresses the rich world, like how we're going to get our electric cars or, how we're going to heat our houses. And I'm going to talk about why there's a number of important reasons that we should really be talking about the other 7 billion. Let's see here. How do I make this go? So if we look, here's a graph, and it's old, but how many cars are owned by 1,000 people and the per capita income? And we look at Germany, and the United States is about the same. We have almost a car per person, and we're making on the order of, $40,000 per person. And we can look at this globally and see that, for instance, in Malawi, they have about 3 cars per 1,000 people compared to our 800 cars. And so the majority of the global economy is poor. So what should we do about that? And this is a question that I have, like the first question I pose to my students when we start our class. And I want you to think about, what do you think we should do about the fact that the majority of the world is poor? And I actually have a poll I could put up here and ask you, but I'm not sure if it works. And then let me move on to another one. The present practice of the Rich Countries Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. What do you think their perspective is? And you might think, well, we really want to help other people out. But if we look at what actually happens when the rubber hits the road, now this is old. This is, going on 8 years ago. Ford was going to build with perfect capitalistic intentions. Ford was going to build a company in Mexico to increase its revenue. And Trump made so much trouble that they scrapped that idea. And then he asked, okay, what about all the Mexican people who are going to work there? What are they going to do now? And in any case, when we look at this model, it really is pretty clear that the United States and most rich countries, their intention is not to, to help. And I don't even need to step in a political statement of what's going on now with the new change of administration. But let's take a look at some numbers. We look at the per capita emissions of different countries. And people talk a lot about China. Their emissions are high, but per person, they're still about half of what ours is. And so if you ask yourself, so we are still emitting. So we're down from the 70s when each person was emitting on the order of 20 tons per year. And we're down to 15 tons. But what if all 8.2 billion people were emitting 15 tons? And that would be 123 gigatons, which we compare to present emissions of 35 gigatons. Right? So we know the rest of the world wants to be like us. And they're emitting very little right now. Oh, so one of the other things we should look at, rather than how much we're emitting right now, the United States down here, less than China, but look at the total cumulative emissions, right? Because throughout its time since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the United States has emitted, far more carbon dioxide than any other country. And that's important because one, that's the carbon dioxide that's up in the atmosphere right now. And two, that's money in the bank because our economy is based on transforming energy through originally from fossil fuels, transforming energy into money making to our economy. And so we have produced a lot of carbon dioxide and it's made a lot of money. So and as a result, we've created the climate change that is that the poor suffer from the most. Okay, you're looking at pictures. Many people died in Malawi after Hurricane Freddie in 2023. No, we don't want to see it. It's sad. Okay, so let's take a look at some more numbers. We can look at population. Here we are, and we see Africa is set to gain like by a factor of 3. Asia will also grow and may drop. And whenever you bring up population, there's this awkward question. Someone will say to you, "Oh, so who should we kill first?" Right? And it's not, I mean, we don't need to get bogged down in the weeds or in this conflict, because there's a clear connection between education and birth rates. That if you educate girls, the birth rates go down and the quality of life improves. Okay, and let's see, another bit of information. We look at use of coal by region, and what we see is China is still building its infrastructure with coal. And Africa is this little line right here, and they plan to have 3 billion people. And if their economy grows, do we want them to grow with coal? And let's skip over this one. So what should we do? And I just want to make a very strong argument that we should be selfless and try to help them, because we've made ourselves very rich and we have the capacity to help them. And in the process, we created climate change, which is causing them undue hardship. But if you don't like that we shouldn't be selfless, we should be selfish, because we care about our children and we want carbon levels to drop. And their population is growing and their economies are growing. So what should we do about this? So I have classes at Cal Poly where students engage collectively. They engage collaboratively with organizations in Africa, and they look for common solutions. And so we don't know what to do exactly, but stepping in to learn together is a mechanism that we're using. And my research is cooking. So this talk is going to be mostly about cooking. Why do we care about cooking? This is a 3-stone fire. The woman is blowing on the coals to cook her food. So 90% of the energy consumption for the poor is cooking. So it's a huge portion of their emissions, the gross majority of their greenhouse gas emissions. There's 4 million deaths annually from breathing in the air in indoor, they call it household air pollution. And that's more than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. There's a lot of financial costs, there's deforestation, and the soot, besides hurting your lungs, is also a greenhouse gas because the black particles go into the air and it absorbs sunlight, right? So it warms the earth too. So here you're looking at an aerial view of Malawi. On the right is a natural preserve, and on the left, you can see that they've deforested the land. And actually, when you live in Malawi, you can see they're also digging up the roots of the trees to make charcoal. So they're really out of fuel. And charcoal is very nice to cook with. People are transporting it on bikes. It's illegal, but if they're arrested and their bikes are taken away, they'll have another bike tomorrow. And so initially you look, or I looked at this and said, solar cooking must be the answer, because these are the hottest, driest places in the world and they don't have fuel. So we should just use solar cooking. And I kind of present solar cooking as the most well-established development failure in my classes. And it's for reasons we know. I mean, solar cooking works so well. You can cook your food just like in these little reflective panels. But people don't accept them. They don't pick them up because they don't want to cook outside. They don't want to move them around following the sun. They want to cook after dark. They want more power. They want really very much what we have. And actually, if you look at solar cooking technologies, even in Kathmandu, at this university that specializes in renewable energy, they've never used them, or they're not using them now for sure, and they're falling apart. And so I initially started working on solar cooking for about 8 years. And we built these beautiful concentrators that were on the order of 2,000 watts. We could cook like really powerful. But I struggled with the fact that they were complicated, they broke, they were expensive, and people really didn't want to cook outside on these cookers. And then I noticed this graph one day and saw that solar panels had decreased by a factor of 100 since I was a kid. A 100-watt solar panel used to cost $10,000, and now it costs $100. And so pretty soon I thought solar panels are going to be cheaper than the mirror materials for these cookers. And so I presented at a conference, and they said there's no way that cost will continue. Well, that was 10 years ago. And we see that the cost has depressed another factor of 10. So actually, solar panels have gone from the most expensive way to generate electricity in the 70s to the least expensive way now. And so it's very unglamorous for me to talk at physics presentations because there are people doing work on black holes and neutrinos and very interesting things. And I say I'm cooking. All I do is take a solar panel and connect it to a heater and put it in an insulated chamber, and I can cook. Right? And with that, with 100 watts, you can bring 1 gallon, not 1 gallon, with 100 watts, you can bring 1 kilogram of water to a boil in 1 hour. And if you're insulated, that means over the course of the day, you could probably cook 5 kilograms of beans, of stew, of rice. But there's something more salient or more pertinent, and that is, how often do you think I cooked my own dinner with these concentrators when I did research? And I did cook from time to time when I gave a presentation, like here at Cal Poly in this picture. And I would cook and people could eat the food and they liked it. But actually, I cooked 0 times my own dinner. And then when I put a solar panel on the roof and brought a wire into the kitchen, I cooked almost every day for a year. And what I found is that it was as convenient or more convenient than other methods, than my stove. I could just put the food in and it would cook. It would cook during the day, slow cook sometimes. And you know, it was located on my house on the roof. In the kitchen is where the cooker was. It was very convenient. It's very inexpensive. It has no moving parts. And so I started doing research with my students at Cal Poly, where, what's going on here? Where they would design better cookers and they would cook every day. And I said that was very important because you have to hear yourself say, this sucks. I hate it. And then when you hear yourself say that, you're like, oh, we need to make an innovation to improve the technology. And so we continues to improve the technology. Okay, so then you say, well, what if I want more than 100 watts? What if I use grid power? What if I don't want to use a solar panel or I have a battery? It doesn't matter. If you insulate your cooking, you'll save energy and money. If you have solar panels, you'll need fewer solar panels. Or if you use grid electricity, you'll use less of it. And the real question to me is, can we produce these locally? Can we produce them in Africa? So there's a whole bunch of different ways you could make this work. You could have a very small one. You could have a more powerful one. You could have it grid connected. You could have a hybrid. You could have a battery connected. That would be very expensive. But the bottom line is, if you insulate it, you'll save money. And so what if we want to cook at night? You can store energy in a battery, and that's probably the way it's going to go ultimately, because one, batteries are getting cheaper and cheaper, just like solar panels. And two, people who want solar electric cooking will also want electric power. And so the solar electric cooking progress is going to be dovetailed, I think, with just rural electrification in developing countries. And so with thermal storage, we were able to bring 1 liter of water to a boil in less than 3 seconds. You can have huge fluxes of power. That corresponds to 100,000 watts, way more than your microwave. And so we can look at the different ways to make this. My favorite way is just connect a heater directly to a pot inside of insulation. And I'll tell you, every woman I've shown this to in Africa and America has said, I will never cook with that ugly piece of crap with wires hanging off it. So that doesn't work. So we have a removable pot that you can pull in and out and cook. You can make thermal storage by making the pot thick, and you can put a pot inside of a pot if you want to, cook your food in a different pot, or if you want to cook slower. So anyway, I did cook my dinner almost every day for a year. And now I don't have it because I took it back to school, but I want to get it back again. So anyway, I got about $200,000 from Max, Modern Energy Cooking Services, to spend over the course of 5 years. And I decided what I wanted to do was, rather than build that technology in the United States, what most people are doing is they're working with China to manufacture technologies inexpensively in China and then bring them into Africa. And I said, no, this isn't rocket science. We should be able to build this in Africa. And I want to do that because, one, it will support the local economy. The money can stay in Africa. There's a lot of innovation if we all build together. But one thing people overlook, pardon me, is that it gets kids excited when you go into a school and you start cooking with the new technology, and they see a future for themselves to build these cookers. So it stimulates education in technology. And so we meet every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. in California time. And you're all welcome to join us if you want. Just let me know and we'll send you a link. And so I went to Africa. I guess I didn't say that. I went to Africa and I visited most of these partners, each for about a month. And I learned from them. We found different ways to build cookers. Here you see we take screen as rebar and lay it down and put concrete over it. And we can make a thin concrete cooker top that we immerse in insulation. This is Clement. He is in Zambia. We had a workshop in Togo where we had about 20 practitioners come, and we learned about the science or the technology, and everybody built cookers. And in fact, you want to look at this one. Do you see this dotted line, this red dotted line? Now, when it's gone, what you see is below that red dotted line, that is solid aluminum that was poured in Togo. And so it's that big chunk of aluminum that can hold the heat if you want to have thermal storage, if you want to store your heat all day long. But you can also just cook and use food and cook food all day long. And at the workshop, we did a lot of cooking. And so I have to confess, and it sounds very naive, that I had thought I could go to Africa and I would help stimulate manufacturing capacity. Like I would create manufacturing capacity for people to build these cookers. And that's a heavy lift. But what I found was much more interesting and effective is I would go and find the pre-existing manufacturing capacity of what people were already building, and find a way to get them to build cookers. So here you see in almost every town, they are recycling aluminum. And here it's always barefoot too, but they always had all their toes. And there are clay studios where they make pots. In Ethiopia, you've had those big Ethiopian pancakes called injera. that they make with the mitad. These are the machines that make those. And it's actually in Ethiopia that I learned how to make an electric heater with just a piece of nichrome wire. That in order to make it not corrode, you needed to fold up the wires at the edge so that you made a very good electrical contact. And that proved to be helpful later. So it's not that I taught people stuff. We all learned together, which was great. So we set up 2 programs at vocational schools. This is a pretty wealthy vocational school in Lilongwe, the capital of Malawi. And you can see the students are nicely dressed, right? And this is a poorer school in a rural area. One young woman had a baby that she brought with her all the time. And the students loved the projects because we went in there and they were already learning about electronics, but they built the cookers and they would cook their lunch every day. And so there's a classic story about development is that someone from the United States or someone from a rich country goes to Africa and they set up a program that's great and then they leave and it falls apart. And when I meet someone who has a successful development program, the first thing I ask them is, what makes your project successful? And the answer has every time been a local champion, someone on the ground from that area that owns that project. And so, in this sense, vocational schools may be the perfect partner because these vocational schools are still producing cookers. They have a dedicated instructor that's already being paid. So when I leave, they stay. The students are enthusiastic. They want a job after they graduate. And the school itself is entrepreneurial. They want to sell what they're producing. And because you have the students going out into the community, not only are you training people to build them, but you also have a mechanism for adoption, for studying adoption. And so I could end right there, but I'll tell you a little more. I spent 3 months in Nepal, and Nepal was interesting because they have more manufacturing capacity already. I found a factory there that would be able to build these cookers out of stainless steel. And we made the best ones I've ever made. They're way better than what we make in the United States. And actually, I've imported 2 of them that we have now. So this is, I have to disclose something. This is a fail, of course, right? They didn't center the aluminum pour correctly, but it's a very good drawing. I mean, it's a very good representation of what you have. So we have a thermal storage with another pot inside of it that makes good thermal contact. And the reason we're doing that is if you cook directly in this recycled aluminum, there's a possibility. So recycled aluminum is recycled in like every major town that I visited in Africa and Nepal. But there's no quality control on the aluminum. So they have car parts, engine heads, and there's all kinds of contaminants that can be in the aluminum. And there's been some studies that show that these contaminants, arsenic, lead, leach into the food when you cook it directly. And so if you have a pot that's made out of pure aluminum, you can put it in there and you can still use the thermal storage, but you won't contaminate the food. And it was brought up to me by the people who published that study about contamination. You really shouldn't even use aluminum anyway. You should use iron because iron leaches iron into the food. And most of these people are iron deficient, and that would be really good for them. So there was a local producer of electric heaters. And in fact, I said to him, do you have a problem with the electrodes corroding right where you join the filament, the heater wire to the power wire? And they said, yeah, that happens. And I said, well, let me show you what I learned in Ethiopia. So I showed them how to make better electrical contact. So this is where they made them. Okay, we're almost done here. Now, the interesting thing about Nepal is they have two markets where solar electric cooking could be really helpful. And the obvious one is off-grid communities like the foothills of the Himalayas, because they don't have anything to burn there. It's so high and dry that they don't have any wood, and they have to bring all of their fuel in by mule or by helicopter or both. And so it's very, very expensive. But the other thing that's really interesting is that both India and Nepal have made very bold commitments to electric cooking because for a number of reasons. And Nepal has all of the renewable energy it needs it because of the rivers. So they have a lot of microhydro because it's mountainous and it rains. And so they have green electricity, but the grid will not handle the surge in the morning and the evening if everybody cooks with electricity. And so what they need to do is what you call load shifting, rather than have people use electricity for cooking just in the morning and just in the evening, they could use this thermal storage and connect to the grid and heat it up, heat that big chunk of aluminum up all night and then cook in the morning and then heat it up all day long and then cook in the evening. So you wouldn't crash the grid. And in fact, they were already doing that, which was I found very interesting. That this is the same factory that I worked at in Nepal. And what these are is these are 20-liter pots for water, the stainless steel pots for water. And they're slightly insulated. They have a little bit of insulation. And they're very low power. In fact, it's just 300 watts and it takes overnight to heat the water up to 90 Celsius. And so they're already doing load shifting because they don't want people to have to boil water in the morning because the electrical grid can't handle it. And so they heat the water all night and then they have they have all the hot water they need in the morning. And so I'm proposing that we do that with aluminum, that rather than heat up 20 liters of water overnight, we heat up 8 kilograms of aluminum overnight to 300 Celsius, and then you can cook really good in the morning. So I have a couple of conclusions. You know, why could we build manufacturing capacity in Nepal better than in Africa? Well, Nepal is already further along than Africa. It's almost halfway between the United States and Africa. And two, when you when you manufacture, sometimes you have to import stuff. And in Nepal, it's easy for them to import from India and China. But in Africa, not only is it far away, but nobody wants Malawian money because they don't export anything. So their money is not valuable. And I've heard people say our Forex is shit. And I believe that means our foreign exchange. And so if you want to import something to Africa, you actually need an account that's euros or dollars. And one of the other things I've discovered is in trying to get a bunch of different factories or some factories and a university to collaborate, there's a lot of aversion in Africa. They don't have a legal system that protects them in their contracts. And so they've told me straight up, we want to do everything ourselves because if we take on a collaborator, they'll just take our ideas and they'll run with it. So those are things that we need to challenges we need to overcome. So in conclusion, my final conclusion, I believe, is that insulated solar electric cookers are inexpensive and they're getting cheaper because solar panels are getting cheaper, batteries are getting cheaper. They're very convenient and they're getting more convenient with the versatility that we're building. They're safe and healthy. And the big challenge for me is, can we build them locally? Thank you very much for your attention. I hope it wasn't too much to hear me blabber on for all this time. So how'd I do? We've got time for questions. Yes, it's like a crock pot. Now, you all heard that, right? Sophia is there. I'm not, let's see, can we unmute people now so you can ask questions or you can write your questions into the chat. Sophia, are you there? Hello?
Hello. Yes,
Oh,
we prefer if the questions were um, submitted through the chat.
all right.
Does anyone have any questions? Oh, how can we learn more about the project as it's ongoing?
Oh, great. Yes, I can send you to some. So there are two links I can give you. Um, if we go to,
Okay, I'll just conclude it once the questions are done.
Totally fine. Some of them just different questions sometimes.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Okay, so I kept the blog during my trip, and so you can find out all the interesting things that happened to me along the way. All right. And so I can give you that link right here. How's that? And if you go to the top, if you go to the top of the page, um, you'll also see my CV or whatever, but also our website, just about insulated solar electric cooking and everything we've been doing. We have 3 publications and there's a lot of videos there, right? And Leslie, you can write me an email. We can get together if you want. How's that?
awesome. I think we received another question from Helen H, and she asks, "What is the hope for Africa?"
Well, I mean, what's your hope for Africa? Um, I guess my hope is to work collaboratively with them to make a sustainable life. I can tell you, um, we hear about the suffering in Africa and it's there, but when you go, it's a beautiful celebration of life. I mean, it's really fun. People are happy. And I mean, I'm not saying everything's okay, but there's every reason to engage because so many interesting things are happening there. But I guess if you're asking me straight up, from like the beginning of the talk, I think Helen, you said you came late, right? So the thing is if Africa matures like technologically the way we did or the way China did, there's going to be a huge amount of carbon dioxide emitted in the process. And right now they're moving in a direction of using coal. And and we have every reason to want to prevent that and help them, into a modern renewable energy infrastructure that's healthier for them. And it requires very little money, because the place, everything's very cheap there. So yeah, my hope is that we can help improve their infrastructure of education and energy and build some um, manufacturing capacity so they can have a stable economy. How's that? What's your hope for Africa?
Bailey asks, "Do the locals like the cookers once they know how to use them, and do they prefer them over the traditional methods they would cook with? Are the cookers fairly user-friendly?"
Right. Um, they are. They are very user friendly, but it does require some changes and people are reluctant to change. Um, the groups that are importing electric pressure cookers from China have brought in a lot, and people have begun using them. There's a whole community around studying how people can adapt to new cooking technologies. So the full disclosure is we don't have a place where they're reliably building these cookers yet. I still have people working on them. The one who's the most successful is a guy named Salma in Togo. You can read about him on my blog if you want. And he has built I think five, and he's brought them up into a village, and they're being used right now. And he's studying how people adopt them. So we're just getting to the point that we can introduce them into the market as a competitive cooking option. And it's okay because we're still transitioning from when solar was expensive. So it'll continue to get cheaper. See, here we have another one. Would you say that the efficacy is the same as a typical stove or comparable equipment that we have? Um, yes, right? Like, so I have um I have a gas range and a microwave oven. And when I cooked for my 1 year with my solar cooker, there are two things I could do. I could throw the food in the morning and come back and it would be cooked. And then um, let's say I cooked a lot of vegetables, there'd be a lot of broth. And then I'd pull it aside and put in rice and wait. Even if the sun was down, it would be hot because it's insulated, it would still be hot. The rice would cook and it would be great. So that would be one way to cook. And then the other way would be I would just heat up that piece of metal really hot. And when I came home, I could cook on the stored heat on the piece of metal. So I would say it is comparable to the equipment that we have, um, but it is different, and people have to get used to it. And the interesting thing is, right, because I mean I'm not averse to admitting failure, right? Although I'm not willing to concede just yet. The place where we made the best cookers was in Nepal, and they're really quite great. But Nepal is the only place I went where I didn't already have a collaborator, right? So when I went to Togo, Salma was already there and we'd communicated for 2 years, and he was ready and he wanted to build these. And so I showed up in Nepal and I found a factory and I got them to build these. But for the whole 3 months I was there, it was always my project. Like I never had a champion on the ground. And so now I've left and they can build them, but nobody's pursuing that right now. And so we'll see what happens.
I have a question just about your focus of work and how you decided to look more into environmental justice and sustainability. You mentioned that you've been to a lot of physics conferences where most of the speakers talk about black holes and stuff, but yours seems way more relevant to social justice. So, is there any turning point you remember?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that seed was always in me, right? I was always kind of a fanatic about sustainability. But I came to Cal Poly in 2000 and I was doing nanotech research. And it was going quite well, actually. And then I bought a house and I had this like, oh shit moment that I would hold myself accountable for my choices, my house. And so I made all these changes to the house, this house here that I'm in right now. I made all these changes to make it more sustainable. I put in a gray water system. I changed the way the windows are. I grew a whole bunch of fruit. I started composting everything. I put in a composting toilet even. And solar heated shower out back. It was great. And then after a year of that, I realized I was much more interested in this research than in nanotech. And so I had the opportunity to take a sabbatical at a nanotech center, but instead I went to Berkeley and studied sustainability. So the turning point for me was when I bought a house and realized that I I needed to innovate around it. And there is kind of a lesson there in that if there's something you're interested in and believe in, you should live it as well as just study it. And so, like, for instance, I had already made a retained heat cooker. Do you know what a retained heat cooker is? Um, I mean, essentially, I just wrapped a pot of beans up in a sleeping bag and put it in the oven, right? So, like, it's, when you heat something up, if you have to cook it a long time, once it's hot, all of the energy you give it is just to keep it boiling. But if it didn't lose heat, you wouldn't have to, use any energy. So you bring your food to a boil, you wrap it up real warm, and then you just leave it there and it cooks by itself. And it was doing that I realized, well, wait, if we just had a little heater in there, it not only wouldn't get cool at all, but it would heat up. So that's what started the whole thing is living this experimental kind of sustainability innovation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wrote a chapter of a book about that. I can give you the link. It's a picture book. And it's kind of funny because there were a lot of weird things that happened to me. Do you want me to put that in the chat?
Sure, that would be great. And while we're still here, does anyone else have more questions?
Oops. Yeah. So if you want some reading, it's about 10 pages long, a lot of pictures. If you want some reading tonight and a good laugh.
Alrighty, sounds great.
I don't have the link. Oh, there. Sorry, it's here. Okay.
Darn. Yeah, and again, I'm the only Pete in the physics department at Poly. Send me a message. I'm lonely. It's all right.
Okay.
Very, very good. I was worried about getting finished, but looks like I had time left over.
I
If you
have
want,
fun. Oh,
yeah,
I have fun saving all the kitchen sink water in my condo and putting it out on my balcony plants, and the balcony plants are really happy. The
yes,
trouble is I'm only helping, tiny, tiny person in a tiny area.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's good though. And that's an innovation that that it makes you learn, right?
Mhm.
So let me take a couple more minutes and just talk about something else I wasn't going to talk about, but it's actually fascinating. Because I do have some more time. This is more interesting than solar cooking, actually. So, um, the first 3 weeks I spent in Malawi. The first 3 weeks I spent in Malawi, I traveled around with Rachel and this Maasai warrior that I became really good friends with. And what we did was we set up these solar cafes where people could buy solar panels, and we showed people how you could cook with solar electric cooking. And we did a bunch of cooking. It was fun. But the other thing we did was we would find a woman and say, bring your friends tomorrow morning. And there would be 5 to 12 women in the morning. And we would give them a kilogram of beans and a bunch of firewood. And we would watch them cook. And so they would get free dinner and we would get free data. And we could watch how much wood they used and how much charcoal they used. And they dance and sing. It was pretty rustic. We slept on the ground sometimes. That's Sangoyan. He is the Maasai that I was working with. That's the bathroom. And I also studied how improved cookers, can reduce the use of firewood. And what I found is that although everyone recognizes they're wasting or that they need to save wood, that there's a real problem with the deforestation, people, when they cook, do not practice that. So you ask yourself, how efficient is this fire? I mean, it's burning all over outside the pot. The pot is boiling way more than it needs to. It's actually spitting chunks of beans out into the air. And it wasn't until we instituted a contest is I said, because we said if you only use up half your firewood, you can take the rest home, right? So that's, kind of valuable. You think that they would want to take it home. But what we did was we had a contest that the person who used the least amount of wood to cook their beans won $1, right? Which is, it's about what you'd make in a day working in Malawi. So she's very happy because she won the $1. And so this is this is Nepal, where I was in Nepal. And I had a conclusion here I was going to give you, but I don't find it now. That when I looked at how much firewood people used to cook a kilogram of beans, it was between 1 kilogram of wood and 8 kilograms of wood, which tells you that you can cook it with 1 kilogram of wood just fine if you're very careful. And so there's something that there's a huge global industry around improved cook stoves about how to save energy with these better cook stoves, and that just practicing to use less firewood would be really effective, and nobody I know does it. So I thought I'd show you those pictures because we had a little bit extra time. But you can go now or stay and talk some more.
You probably haven't heard of Unite to Light. I think UCSB, probably materials department.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different organizations that go down with solar panels, batteries, and LED lights, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, UCSB they used to hold a sustainability conference every spring, I think, for, is it called SHESI? The Sustainability in Higher Education.
I don't remember those.
Yeah. And I went there once and worked with a group that was studying solar electric lights.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Bailey asks, what's one thing you learned from locals that you brought back with you? Lastly, what was your favorite food from the area?
Favorite food. The mangoes in Ethiopia are so gorgeous. Yeah, maybe it was just that simple. Um, I told you some things like how to make wires and um, how to build these cookers out of concrete. But I think you want to know something like philosophically. Um, I mean, I learned that I really like being in Africa. They're such a friendly group of people. I mean, you didn't ask me, but I'll tell you anyway. What are the valuable things that they learned from me? And I think I introduced guacamole into Malawi, right? And they were really stoked when I mashed up that avocado with all the stuff. And the Ugandans boil everything. And I had had too much boiled food. And they boil they boil plantains. Um, if you said the name, I know what it is, like moussaka or something like that. We would have boiled plantains and mashed every morning for breakfast. And finally, I said, I can't eat them anymore. And I'd take them and I'd keep them and I'd slice them up because it got real hard and fry them. And so I made, and they thought that was great. So those are the two things that if you go to Uganda and people are eating fried mashed plantains or they're eating guacamole in Malawi, that was my contribution. Oh, there's one more. There's one more. Is they would peel their potatoes in Malawi. And I was like, wow, that takes a lot of work. And you're like starving, like not everybody's starving, but everybody is trying to get more food. And you're throwing away the part of the potato that actually has the most nutrition. And they said, no, you can't eat the skin. And we boiled some potatoes with the skin, and they hated them. They gave them to the chickens. And then I said, okay, we got to fry them because there are places in the United States where you can buy just potato skins. And when we fried them, they liked them. And so there are people that are eating potato skins now, hopefully, that didn't used to eat them before.
I
Thank
suppose
you.
there's a lot of fiber in potato skins, but certainly it's not, a potato skin doesn't seem like a terribly high fiber food. I'm picturing them maybe wanting a diet with less fiber. I don't know.